Most think this is a tale of shattered utopias. It is not. A bathysphere grinds into Rapture's ribs, a wingbeat trembles above. Creeks open to a bathysphere mural grinds into channeled through split by Rapture's lid. Collectivist a hymn was winged never about the many. It was a scalpel unraveling. Creeks open to a bathysphere mural grinds into channeled through split by Rapture's little cracks, ribs sisters. It was a scalpel unraveling. What if the big sisterhood was just a mirror, reflecting the mind that shattered him? Sofia Lamb, full name etched in Rapture's blood. Hired by Andrew Ryan to assess citizen mental health, she weaponized Delta's trauma, forging the big sisterhood as psychological warfare. Not a rebellion, but a mirror of his shattered mind. A whisper, not of liberation, but of the experiment that turned him into. Sofia Lamb was no saint. She was the woman who measured suffering clinically. Subject Delta was no hero. He was the hollow shell of a man whose child had been stolen by the war that drowned Rapture in blood. How does a mind survive when its love is weaponized? Lamb made him watch, made him kill, made him bury Aliner's laughter beneath his own screams. Then she let him rot. 7 years passed. Rapture's ruins whispered with ghosts. When she pulled him from the grave, he was not whole. He was a wound kept open. The big sisterhood was not a rebellion. It was the twisted logic of her experiment children raised to adore a monster because their creator said so. Aliner's name became a spell, a leash. Delta walked with gears shattered in his chest, chasing shadows of the girl he once protected. Did he know the sister he cradled was just another mirror of his brokenness? Lamb knew grief could be a scalpel. She carved into Delta's heart until he bled purpose, until he became the thing he hunted, the thing he loved, the thing he was made to be, a weapon. Not of flesh, of trauma, of a father who could not save his daughter, now forced to become the nightmare that haunts every orphan's soul she bound to him. The garage reeked of exhaust and regret. Delta's breath hitched metallic, desperate as the barrel pressed into his temple. Lamb's voice, steady as a metronome, counted the seconds between his heartbeat and Aliner's hollow sigh. 10 years later, he awoke in a lab bathed in sterile blue light. Machines hummed, antiseptic stung his nostrils. Aliner's face loomed, cracked with relief. His body remembered the cold slab, the weight of a life erased. In 1968, Lamb's cult took root in shadowed hallways. Flickering bulbs cast faces gaunt, their whispers sweet as rot. Delta moved among them, a puppet with severed strings. They called him Big Daddy, but his mind was a locked room. Only fragments, a child's laugh, a gun's report, a woman's trembling hands. Lamb supplied the missing pieces carefully, like a surgeon avoiding the spine. The big sisterhood was not a rebellion, it was a cage of mirrors. Each orphan bound to Delta became a reflection of his brokenness, their pain a key to Rapture's vault. Lamb knew what objectivists could not. Collective suffering sharpens into a blade. When Delta finally grasped the truth, High's revival not a second chance, but a scalpel cutting open his psyche. Lamb had already rewired his dreams. The first whisper came in a dream. *, you are not a man, you are a monument to what we will unmake. *. The cracked mural looms, Fisher's spiderweb through Comstock's frozen smile, through Ryan's shadowed desk, through every lie etched in Rapture's bones. A tremor in the Stonia whispers echo. Sofia Lamb didn't build a dynasty, she carved a scalpel from Delta's rage, the Big Daddy's errant fathers. They are hollows, their roars scripted by a girl who knew grief was the only truth that split men like kindling. The office breathes. Dust motes hang where Ryan's speeches once hung. The mural's crack splits Lamb's name in the brick Benioff it always has. Her sisterhood is no revolt. It is a mirror, cracked and rotating, reflecting Delta's shattered mind back at itself. Every dive, every rescue, a rehearsal for the end play. * you are not a man. You are a monument. * the floorboards creak. A shadow shifts where no light touches. The experiment never ended. It only learned to wear a wedding dress. The little sisters don't run from Rapture. They run to the fissure, to become the thing that claws its way out of the dark. 199 words. The files are unambiguous. Sofia Lamb did not revive Subject Delta to save him. She revived him to calibrate a weapon. His grief was not a wound to heal, it was fuel for a psychological forge. Audio logs recovered from Rapture's ruins confirm this. In one entry she calls his trauma the perfect catalyst, unprocessed, unrelenting, and infinitely moldable. The rescue narrative was a veneer. Beneath it, Lamb engineered a subject whose pain would birth loyalty, whose brokenness would code obedience. Delta's shattered mind became the sisterhood's blueprint. Every syllable of her diaries traces the math of manipulation, how guilt could be rebranded as duty, how loss could be repurposed as purpose. The big sisterhood was never a movement, it was a feedback loop, a cycle where Delta's suffering generated recruits, and recruits generated more suffering to harvest. Lamb's genius lay in framing the cycle as salvation. To Delta, she was the surgeon stitching his scars into a flag. To history, she was the architect who turned a man's collapse into a religion. What remains unseen is the final equation. If trauma is the seed, then what is the harvest? The diaries end mid-sentence. The answer, perhaps, still gnaws beneath the floorboards of Rapture. 243 words. They did not create little sisters from love. They carved them from Delta's shattered heart. Sofia Lamb knew pain was not a flower, it was a forge. Eleanor, once a girl, became the template for a new species of predators. Her hollow eyes, her mimicry of warmth, each was a scalpel slicing open Delta's grief. What is empathy when it is not chosen but imposed? The first bond between Big Daddy and Little Sister was not a union, it was an infection. Lamb's cult did not worship Delta, they dissected him. Every time he cradled Eleanor, they measured how sorrow could be engineered. Every time she smiled, they charted how to weaponize trust. The sisters' whispers were not lullabies. They were traps threaded with the DNA of a man who learned too late that love could be a vector. Did Delta know his agony was the blueprint? Did he hear the screams beneath the lab's hum? The big sisterhood did not rebel against Rapture. It inherited its cruelty. Eleanor's prototype was not a savior. She was a message, trauma refined into control, and Deltapur, broken Delta, his final act was not to protect. It was to birth an army of hollow hearts. Each sister a mirror, each bond a leash. The experiment was never about redemption, it was about ownership, and the floorboards still gnaw. 243 words. The big sisterhood was no uprising, it was a scalpel cutting into the mind of a broken child. Sofia Lamb did not forge warriors, she forged extensions of her own will. Delta's scars were not wounds to heal, they were cracks Lamb pried open, flooding them with purpose. Each sister's bond was a feedback loop. Empathy the weapon, grief the trigger. The sisters did not fight for freedom. They fought to feel useful to the woman who made them feel anything at all. Lamb's grand design was not chaos, it was precision. A cult wrapped in maternal lies, a rebellion scripted in the margins of a psyche shattered by the sea. Delta's pain was not a casualty, it was the blueprint. Every whispered promise of sisterhood was a thread binding him tighter to her design. When the sisters clutched survivors, they did not seek kinship. They inflicted the very loneliness Lamb had carved into Delta's bones, a contagion of need, a plague of dependency. Rapture's end was not a revolution, it was a verdict. Lamb's experiment thrived not in victory, but in total control of the child who could not escape his creator, the cult that could not escape its architect. And Delta, the first whisper in the dark, became the echo. His trauma the foundation, his obedience the proof, the floorboards still gnaw. But the hunger beneath them is not his, it is hers, always hers. 287 words. The whisper was never rescue, it was a scalpel. Ryan's contract demanded more than observation. Lamb dissected suffering, cataloged cracks, learned how to reopen them. Delta's screams were not failures. They were data. The sisterhood's rebellion was a feedback loop, her voice sharpened to a frequency that made his pain obey. How many sleepless nights did she test the edges of his trust? How many lies layered like bandages to keep the wound fresh? The first whisper was the trigger. Every gasp, every broken plea trained to answer her call. She did not need his strength. She needed his brokenness perfected. A mind unmoored becomes a harbor for anyone bold enough to sail it. His trauma was not a wound, it was a key. And she turned it until the lock screamed. What does a sister do when her patient is also her weapon? She cradles the barrel of the gun and waits for the shot to echo. 199 words. Sofia Lamb's experiment did not end in Rapture's ruins. 13 Her method trauma as a scalpel, a shackle, a scripture breathes in every cult that masks control as care. 25 The big sisterhood was never Delta's salvation. It was a mirror held to his shattered psyche, a war waged not with bullets but with the hallucination of love. 37 Objectivism promised mastery over chaos. Lamb proved chaos could be mastered as a weapon. 49 Her sisters do not fight for freedom. They replicate the womb of Rapture, where pain is not a scar but a script, and every act of protection is a rehearsal for obedience. 61. Modern regimes understand this. They do not punish. They curate trauma, let it fester into a dependency only they can soothe. 73. What echoes in every whispered mantra of a cult leader, every closed fist of a revolutionary. The same lesson Delta learned: when your creator is also your captor, resistance becomes a language you never learned to speak. 85. The big sisterhood did not rebel against Rapture. It perfected its sin. 93. And in the quiet between heartbeats, the first whisper still humps a hymn to the mind broken open, waiting to be filled. 105. The whisper was never rescue, it was a scalpel. Ryan's contract demanded more than observation. Lamb dissected suffering, cataloged cracks, learned how to reopen them. Delta's screams were not failures. They were data. The sisterhood's rebellion was a feedback loop, her voice sharpened to a frequency that made his pain obey. How many sleepless nights did she test the edges of his trust? How many lies layered like bandages to keep the wound fresh? The first whisper was the trigger. Every gasp, every broken plea trained to answer her call. She did not need his strength. She needed his brokenness perfected. A mind unmoored becomes a harbor for anyone bold enough to sail it. His trauma was not a wound, it was a key. And she turned it until the lock screamed. What does a sister do when her patient is also her weapon? She cradles the barrel of the gun and waits for the shot to echo. 199 words. What if Big Sisterhood wasn't a rebellion but a laboratory? Sofia Lamb didn't recruit followers. She forged cultists from Delta's fractured mind, each ritual a scalpel. Each hymn a trigger. Collectivist ideology wasn't idealism, it was a cage, welding pain into loyalty.